Welcome to the Supplement Engineering Podcast. My name is Robert Chesky. Joining us today, my Polish brother from another mother, Lukasz Rakowski, Prometheus Intelligent Sports Technology, and making his glorious return to the Supplement Engineer Podcast, the creator of Fortitude Training, Dr. Scott Stevenson.
Glorious.
Dr. Scott, thank you so much for coming back on the show. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm glad I'm here.
Yeah. So we were talking for a little while beforehand, and you said you've been moving house as of late. So how's that been going? Because the real estate market these days is insane.
I'm doing a for sale by owner, actually.
Good.
Not trying to plug the house. I had no idea you were going to ask that question actually to start the podcast off, but that's been interesting. I have seen, and I continue to be surprised, the full gamut of potential attempts by agents to try to take over the sale of my house and represent me. And it's been like, some of it's kind of disheartening, and then there's some pretty unique attempts. Like I've gotten everything from literally a video, like someone they wrote it a video and didn't watch the whole thing because I don't need it. I'm not going to sit there and go through all these inquiries.
Yeah.
And then some of them, like one was, I guess you're not interested in selling your property yet, blah blah blah. So good luck, or something like he's trying to kind of call me out, and then I've gotten the generic message, and it says if you no longer wish to receive these messages, it seems like a personal message, and then at the bottom it says if you no longer wish to receive these, please reply with unsubscribe, and everything in between. It's been just crazy. Not the increase that I want for purchase, but the housing market's just kind of insane right now, and it's.
So you used to be in Florida, correct?
I'm still in Florida. I just moved a few hours south to be closer to my mom.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a place with more room for the dogs. I've got a barn where I've set up most of my gym equipment so I can train, and it's even hotter than in Tampa because I'm a little bit further south. But mainly that now I was training out on my I had a screened-in porch. So there was some wind that would kind of move through there. Now I'm in the barn. I haven't even I had two fans I brought with me, neither of which are working now. So I have no airflow. Literally, but it's so much fun. It's just absolutely diabolical training in the heat. And the thing, I was just telling someone this, a buddy of mine was inquiring about saunas. He's starting to do Russian saunas and Russian hot baths and contrast therapy, trying to figure out if that can help with his performance. He's a bodybuilder and he does Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And I tell you what, when I go into a regular gym, and I do have some gym memberships, more than I probably need, I go into a regular gym where it's air conditioned, I notice the performance enhancement. Like it's like I've got an extra 30% of go. Like I don't, I'm ready. I can just keep on rocking in a way that I just can't, in the gym here at home in the barn. And the problem is too that I get up and I have my dogs have had some medical issues. So I have to stay on a schedule with especially one of my pups. Mm-hmm. So I don't get in there until 2:00 in the afternoon when it's
baking by that point.
It's hot. And of course it's humid down here. And it's just and men don't do this as well as women just in general. Anhidrosis is the term for when your body stops sweating when the skin is saturated with fluid, and men tend to sweat, whereas women glisten, so to speak, as they like to say. Yeah. So women don't sweat as well. They do a better job of conserving fluids in that sense. And you only get really the main heat dissipation, not from the sweat dripping off of you. It's from the evaporation. So It's the phase change from water to vapor when the sweat evaporates. And I'm getting none of that. It's also an adaptation that you sweat more when you're heat acclimated or climatized to a hot and humid environment. And I'm just pouring. In fact, I look outside, literally a couple days ago, I was training, and just when I was training, we got the afternoon summer showers that we get here in Florida very often. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I got to walk back from the gym to the house, and it's like I didn't get any wetter except for on my head because I was totally soaked. Yeah. So it's fun. I actually kind of enjoy the challenge. It's a neat little. It doesn't help my performance. It's probably not the best thing in terms of from a pure hypertrophy standpoint, but sure does make it fun out there to just be like going to town and kind of crazy environment.
Yeah. What's your home gym consist of? Obviously, you can't make it as fully decked out as a commercial gym would be. But obviously you've got a barn, so you've got a pretty good amount of space to work with there. So what do you have any like essential pieces of equipment that you would have regardless?
I have, and I've had this thing for like close to 20 years now. Yeah, like 17, 18 years. I have an Iron Master. If you go to ironmaster.com, I have an Iron Master 950. They have made those for probably a decade. Now they're on to like the 2000. But the 950 previously stood for, that was the capacity of the thing. So you can load 950 pounds, or at least get to 950, including the bar weight. Yeah. And it's a glorified Smith machine that basically lets you do almost everything. I really like the equipment. Their customer service, I have to say this each time, you ever have customer service? Sometimes it's like, okay, like someone's spoofing me here because this customer service is so bad. Like they can't be doing this. Like just dropping the ball on everything repeatedly.
Oh yeah.
So the customer service, my last few experiences were not good at all, but I love the equipment. Mm-hmm. So I can do a vertical leg press on that. Of course, I can squat on it. It's set up for doing pull downs. You can do bent over rows, seated rows. I've got a pec deck attachment. And then I also added 2 pulleys on the outside. So it's basically a pulley system that lets you pull the bar up and down. Like, so if you're doing a pull down, a cable pull down, you've got a cable that goes up through a pulley and then down to the bar, right. And the Smith bar essentially. So then you pull down and it lifts whatever you loaded on the bar. And they've got another system for the pec deck, et cetera. But I've added 2 pulleys laterally. So now I can do I can do cross cable movements and change some of the angles. And I can do like pec flies. Actually, I've set it up so I can do pec flies backwards, it's a nice, really kind of converging cable fly press. So I'm doing pretty much everything I want to in there. I've got a knee extension hamstring curl combo it's decent. The loading curve isn't great, to be honest, and the range of motion isn't great. So I'm a little lacking there, but I've been just training on that. And I've got, like, for instance, yesterday I've got I get these things if people are interested from NewYorkBarbell.com, I think. They've got a ton of really, really cool accessories. They got equipment, sort of an equipment line of their own. But I've got a T-bar row bracket that just goes under. It fits under any machine, basically anything that'll be able to hold it down. And it's just got a sleeve that you put an Olympic bar into, and then you can do rows in the corner, so to speak, is like Ronnie rows we used to call them, like because Ronnie Coleman was doing those with 12 plates back in the day. So I did those. I have a Flex? I have Flex Wheeler has a Widow. I think he calls it the Widow something. Widow. I want to say Widow Maker isn't right, but it's a bar attachment that actually has a hole that you can slip onto a Olympic bar for doing those, as well as adjustable handles that let you go out wide or come in close for all sorts of pull down movements. So that gives me tricep press down and like kind of a cable dip opportunity. There's a bunch of things that can be done with that. So I've just gathered together some little bits and pieces, and I can do. There's almost nothing that I can't do in there. It's not as nice as going to a gym where you've got multiple lines of equipment. You can find like a perfect sort of loading curve that feels really, really nice. Yeah. But for right now, with one of my pups and what we're going through, and I don't even want to leave her. And we're trying to keep. She's got a problem with one of her eyes. We're trying to keep her from losing sight in that eye. So I've got to give her eye drops throughout the day. And I'm just staying close to them. So I just go out there, bang it out, try to keep from, dying of heat exhaustion, and then, and just stay close to home. But I love the Iron Master. They're absolutely worth it. If someone wants a home gym, and they're even not that tall. A lot of times if people are in like an apartment or something like that, you run into like some of the gyms that are really nice, usually cost more. They're like 13 feet high or some shit. Like you can't put that unless you have a dome ceiling. Yeah.
That's big. Like I've seen 8 or 9 foot ones. I don't think I've ever seen.
Well, I'm exaggerating probably, but some of them are like they're too high for people to. If you go and Google around, like people, that's the most commonly asked question. I need one that fits in like an 8-foot ceiling, and it's like there aren't very many, and this one does. So cool. Yeah.
With training outdoors in that super hot, humid, swamp-ass environment that is Southern Florida, are you doing anything special as far as like pre-intro workout, supplementation, post-workout, hydration, electrolytes, anything like that?
No, I mean, I'm just kind of going after it. No, I mean, I obviously I drink a lot of fluid throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
I have to. But yeah, I mean, right now I'm not trying to get ready for a contest. I'm not dieting down for anything. I'm just enjoying. I'm doing the training because I love to train. Just love to do it. And I've got my priorities have to kind of be in place. I'm like with the move, just training was my respite, just to be able to get out of there. So yeah, I'm careful with. I haven't had any cramping issues and that kind of stuff. So I've been totally fine as far as being hydrated. But yeah, that could be an issue. If I really wanted to make sure, let's say if I had a show I was diet, I probably wouldn't train there if I was dieting down for a show. At least not often. And most of my workouts are full body. I'm doing fortitude training, so most of the workouts are everything. So legs are pretty much every time I train. Yeah. So yeah, you definitely run into performance impairment issue there, which I wouldn't want to have, especially if I were dieting down. And you tend to hold less water the leaner you get as well. So dehydration, cramping just tends to be an issue more easily when you're really, really lean and dieted. But for me, just average knucklehead, I just bring a couple jugs of water out there, and I do it using my Intra, maintain that. But yeah, I do okay. That's a good question, though.
You've been training for a considerable amount of time. You've created your own training system, and you have a passion for the sport of bodybuilding. Do you ever, and you just said it's your respite, so it kind of helps keep you centered. It's what you look forward to, if not the most thing, the thing that you look forward to the most during the day. It's one of the things that you really get the most enjoyment out of. Do you ever struggle with burnout, or, you want to dabble with different kind of training systems? Like you wanted to go through like a super high volume phase on do like the old Arnold style of volume training, or do you ever go through the things like the average kind of gym goer goes through?
I've done all those things, over the years, I guess. So yeah, I have. If I wanted to do something different, I just would. One thing I know is that if I try, I like to train really, really hard. So for instance, just kind of piggybacking off something you mentioned there, if I wanted to do like a high volume routine where I'd have to hold reps in reserve, I could do that. It'd be fun just to kind of keep a pump going,
right?
And and train that way. And actually, last year I trained. I think we trained together probably at least 6 months. Let's see, kind of added up. It was probably about 5 months at least with Derek Oslin. He's a 212 IFBB pro back in Tampa, and we did John Meadows' training program. John was still alive, at that time.
Right.
Actually, so John had sent him. It was actually the same program that Sean Clarita was doing and Guy Cisternino, because Guy was like 1 week ahead of us, and I saw Sean doing a lot of the same. So I'm like, okay, this is the same deal,
Yeah.
And we tailored some things for Derek in particular. That's one of the things about John's programs, especially the more recent ones, is you can really tailor them for whatever your goals are, whatever you need to bring up, what have you. But that was definitely high volume. And I did that because it was a chance to train with someone who likes to train really, really hard. And I knew from the get-go, I knew that it was too much volume for me. I'm 51 now too, and I've always gotten really, really sore. I think more so than other folks. Yeah. And I train probably harder than the average person. And all those things combined, I'm like, this is going to be way too much. So I just had to eat my ass off to get through it all. And I ended up putting on a good amount of weight. But I knew I had to pull out every recovery trick in the book, basically. Aside from like loading up on gear or something like that, because I'm just cruising along now. I haven't competed for a couple of years, so I just had to make sure I was paying attention to everything, watching my sleep. My intra workout was big. My post workout, that's when people can look back on the hashtag serial gains, and they could find. Did you see that come through? I don't know. That was
I'm not active on anything. So
okay, yeah, I did. What's crazy? We talked about social media. Yeah. Like with all the things that I put out, I try to make the information informative, valuable. Generally, it's of a scientific nature. That's what people kind of want to hear from me, I think, most. Right. And one day I'm just like, I'm going to just post this because I was putting down a box of cereal in my post-workout meal, like a whole box, like whatever. It's like whatever. So I just put one time, just as a pure lark, kind of a joke, hashtag cereal gains. And I think I put cereal gains nation. because everyone's like, John Smith Nation, or like,
Mhm.
everyone's like nation, like you can be part of our tribe. That's the hook about social media. It's
Oh
hook
yeah.
about teams. Like that's a hook that will get humans really, really easily. We're tribal. So you start saying nation about it. It's like, oh, I'm part of this nation. Now I found my identity, like we talked about before the podcast too. So I put down Serial Gains Nation, and I played on that like for like 5-6 months. It was hilarious. And I was getting tags from people all over the world, literally, and I say like, we take in all shapes, colors, creeds, races, everyone, like there's no one's, it's the hashtag nation is worldwide.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was quite fun. But so that was I just did that knowing that wasn't gonna like get me, that wasn't ideal for putting on as much muscle mass and as little fat as possible for having optimal kind of P ratio during gaining. Wasn't ideal in terms of lifestyle because I had to sacrifice. I was training more often than I would have normally, going in with Derek and training when he trained at his, when he needed to train, because he's the guy who was dieting down or off season at first and then dieting to compete. But I got an opportunity to train with someone who really loves to train, who's a world-class athlete, and I'm still just I'm still a fan of bodybuilding. So for me, it's like, it's not like hey, I'm better than you, I've been around longer than you, or what. That's like, I get to train with a guy with an amazing physique who loves to train. Like, this is phenomenal. This is an opportunity that was, it was awesome when I did that with Dave Henry 20 years ago, and I met Dave in the gym and we trained together. And it was awesome last year when I got to do it with Derek. So yeah, I'll take those things whenever I can. This is just sort of what fits right now with with how my priorities need to be, because my dogs are my family. As much as any person, my dogs have always been there for me. So I'm repaying that favor.
Outstanding.
So,
do you think that's something you've developed during your career with training, as far as you're not like, you don't think you're better than another lifter, you can appreciate the sport through all aspects? Because you hear it so often that a lot of the legacy bodybuilders or the retired ones now are saying they don't train like we used to. The physiques are better back in the way. Have you always had appreciation of both the history of the sport and like an appreciation of how people train and the progression of the physiques through the years, and like how they've morphed and changed and evolved? Like, have you kind of always had that mindset of, you just, hey, I love it, whatever form, shape, it takes, you're kind of with it and you embrace it for what it is, and you can appreciate what it used to be as well as what it is now?
I think I get this probably a little bit from my especially my dad, who was someone who just kind of got along with everyone. So he was able to see people, put himself in other people's shoes really easily. And I have a thought experiment I can kind of share that fits with this. You guys got a couple minutes for this? This is my little thought experiment. So imagine you've got a scenario, and don't balk at some of the ethical concerns here, but you've got an ability to clone yourself at will, and you can also travel through time. So you decide to go back and determine, to what extent nature and nurture has impacted who you actually are.
Okay.
And so you go back, 20,000 years, prehistoric man somewhere, and you figure out a way without disturbing the space-time continuum. You put a clone of yourself into a woman who maybe wasn't going to have, the birth was going to be an abortion. This, so you supplant yourself, and maybe you have to change your skin color to match the skin of the people in which you're going to be born again. And then so that person, grows up in that culture at that time. There's no water, there's no electricity, there's nothing but a small tribe of 150, 200 people, what have you. And then you go into the future by 100 years. You go to Africa, you go to South America, you go to the Ukraine, you go all over the world, different times, different epochs. And then, of course, because you've got to time travel, you can zip forward and immediately go and then have an encounter with genetically who's undergone 20, 30, 40 years of life in a completely different environment. And I think if most people, when I present that thought experiment, if you consider how dramatically different you would be if you grew up with no social media, no computers, no electricity, no water, running water, it could be totally, totally different. So if you kind of grasp that, like everyone, and another side point to that is that if you imagine then kind of take that idea on board, someone who is born with their genetics and undergoes what they, and this taps into the idea of sort of free will, and that's a whole other topic. But if they live and experience what they experience growing up as they grow up, then the generation they're born into is going to impact them. So if you were that person born when they were and lived what they lived, experienced what they experienced, you would be exactly the way they are because you would be them.
Yeah.
So then when we look at someone and say, well, that person isn't doing the right thing, or that I would do this differently, it's like, no, if you were them, you would do exactly what they do. Logically speaking, free will is a whole idea. But so we've got genetics, we got nature, we've got nurture, and those two things kind of combine. So then you take a look at, this idea that you mentioned, bring it back to your question of IFBB pros, older school guys, and I think they have a point. Like the guys, there's a greater emphasis on drugs and trying to get in shape and less on just training their asses off. And that's true. That's a function of history and environment and how things, where someone grows up, what someone sees when they go and they experience bodybuilding the way they do. It's different now than pre-internet.
Yeah.
But if those individuals were born 30 years previously, they would have behaved that same way. And if those old schoolers were born 30 years later, they more than likely behave differently than they did in their actual lives.
Yeah.
So that's like sort of this judgment of saying like, I'm right and you're wrong, or this is, you can say it's too bad that these things have happened. That, for instance, I think it's a valid perspective to say how much the availability of information on bodybuilding drug use is so widespread that tends to color people's perspectives. And so you have situations where people use lots of drugs that have side effects that are, unresearched and unknown in that type of high load polypharmacy situation.
Yeah.
And now we've got people who are, having health effects that they wouldn't have if they were more of the mindset, hey, you just got to train your butt off and quote unquote suffer your way into shape. Not that that's the healthiest thing either. Bodybuilding, when you're trying to get on stage is not, it's not a health sport.
Correct.
They don't ask for your blood work, to make sure like, okay, you can come, like we'll let you compete, or like, those two guys are the same, but this guy's HDL is great. He's going to win. Like, not how it works. But so yeah, there's some unfortunate changes. But I think if we like that thought experiment always helped me to sort of realize that, if I were that person who grew up in the way they did, then I would be the same way. If you imagine some person who grew up in a war-torn, gang-ridden inner city scenario, and they're trying to just survive getting through that, and they become an angry, aggressive type of person. It's like, how do I know that I wouldn't end up being just that person, that not someone that I really would want to be around as I am now, but I might be exactly like that. I might even be worse had I grown up in those circumstances. That's just kind of an extreme example. But so, yeah, I think I've just kind of been lucky in that I got to see, my dad. We model ourselves after our parents. I got to see my dad, how he's really non-reactive to lots of things. He kind of got along with everyone. He was sort of the Switzerland, of like the clinic where he worked. They, always sort of egos. He was a physician, so doctors can have egos sometimes, even in a small town. And he always just sort of got along. And so I think I probably picked up on that subconsciously and was able to sort of step back and say, okay, let's look at it from both sides here. Yeah. So, yeah, I just want to, the thing is too, you want to learn from your mistakes. And if you're judging someone and you're holding those prejudices, does that help?
Right.
Does dragging in the mistakes of the past necessarily serve us in the present to figure out how we can make a better future?
Right.
Not necessarily. Depends on what you're doing with that information. So you keep on drudging it up, you shouldn't have done that. And we all know people who they just can't let it go. They you did something in the past, and it makes me think of the story of the two Buddhist monks who had vowed, made a celibate vow, and to never, of course, have sex with a woman, not even to touch a woman. And they came to a river crossing that had flooded over, and there's a woman there who can't make it across because it's flooded over the bridge. But you can walk on the bridge, but her dress is going to get soaking wet, and she's just not sure what she should do. Yeah. One of the monks says, "Hey, I'd be happy to help you cross if you'd so allow me to, I'd be happy. I'll pick you up and I carry you across. We're heading the same direction.
Mhm.
She says, oh, thank you very much. So he does that. He carries her across. He puts her down, and the two monks head their direction. The woman goes the other direction, and they walk for like 4 or 5 miles. And finally, the other monk says, okay, I have to say something. Like, we have a celibate vow, and you just broke that. Like, I don't get it. And he's like, well, I put her down 5 miles ago. It seems like you're still carrying her. And
Yeah.
there's like, that's a Zen koan type of thing. But I like that one because it's like okay,
That's a good one.
yeah, that's a good one. It's worth repeating. And it's like, do we need to hold on to these things? How much does it help to say, hey, you guys, like, you're using too much drugs, and like, you're doing this wrong, and you guys suck, and you don't know how to train hard, and not that I'm saying anyone is saying those exact things, but like sort of this overblown, like, overly critical. It's like, hey, like, let's try to get the training back. You can get into shape and be better off using less drugs. Here's one way to do it. Look how so-and-so trained. Here's how I would do this. So you can, forget the mistakes and look to try to find creative solutions for issues.
Yeah. That also brings up a good point about living by if you're going to apply law, embrace the spirit of law, not necessarily the letter of the law. With like, there's a spirit and like a meaning behind something in terms of like, I thought where you were going with the story is that they saw the woman, and because they took the vow, they weren't even going to touch her. Like we said, we were going to swear off women entirely. We're not going to pick her up and help her even cross the word. Like, so one monk was going to do that, and one monk was going to break the vow and get kicked out of, the monastery or whatever and help her.
Yeah. You're right. That's an interesting thing. Like laws are that's a whole other topic we get into, but
we don't need to get kicked off YouTube Golden.
But it's the spirit of things. It's to try to allow people to live in more harmoniously, and laws and how lawyers often function just creates more mayhem. Like suing someone because you got served hot coffee that you spill on yourself. It's like so there's like you can, like, there's loopholes where you can actually sue someone for something like that. And it's like, no, the intention of the laws is not to allow you to reactively sue people for things they did inadvertently, which really wasn't even their fault. But so there's issues there, but that's a whole other podcast.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Lukasz, you want to jump in with any questions? I feel like I've been hogging the mic.
No worries. Keep on going. We got tons of stuff to talk about. So yeah, man, keep on going.
Okay.
I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna rewind back for a little bit, Dr. Scott. Your intro workout, you said you've kept that pretty consistent. For the listeners that may not remember back to our first podcast or have heard some of your other ones where you've discussed this before, what does your typical intro workout consist of?
The best answer for people who want to sort of model themselves. And it's interesting you say that, because there's a sort of a mentality, a perspective that is sort of an unconscious, it's working unconsciously, I think, in many cases in the bodybuilding world, that we look to those who have the best physiques or those who are the most knowledgeable, and we want to just mimic what they've done. And there's some logic to that. That's how people sell supplements, even though that when you see so-and-so IFBB pro who looks phenomenal, you ask, well, why does he look that way? So, well, he's got great genetics. He's been training his ass off. He's probably enhanced. You think it's because he's using this new form of creatine? No, but still somehow, we still continue to see those athletes representing the brands. The guy, and I think he ended up getting in trouble. The guy who was Jarrett was his name. He was the representative for Subway. Mm-hmm. Remember? And he lost all that weight.
Yep.
That was phenomenal. I would love to see more of those kinds of representatives, because, he wasn't like this, he wasn't this Adonis after he lost all that weight, but he was representative, someone who actually literally, I believe that the deal was that he just decided to like use Subway as sort of a foundational meal for his diet. And he probably had sort of a momentum that was built by doing that. So he ate better in his other meals, and he took on other behaviors. That tends to happen. Someone starts doing, a couple things right, and they say, well, I might as well just do everything as best I can. And lifestyles change gradually. Yeah. But I would love to see more advertising where people are are paying attention to what are the people that are like I am doing that's giving them effects.
The results.
You know, and that's what Muscle Tech used to do back in the day too, like with these tremendous changes. But I don't know how much, you know, those were actually legit, you know, to be honest. One of my favorites, and this is nothing against him, but Franco Santoriello was someone who was a representative for Cybergenics back in the day. And Franco, he was and he had they had a before and after thing with him, and that he did Well, Franco was, before he did that Cybergenics program, I think he had already won like the USA's, the Nationals. He had already gotten a pro card. It was already like he'd already had. So there's a muscle memory component there. And Lee Priest has those famous off-season, you know, photos where he just, you know, he's living on Kentucky Fried Chicken for like 3 months, and then, you know, he's Lee Priest. Then he went. So there's obviously some problems with those transformations, but we have this idea like, what does so and so do, and how can we model that? And so back to what I do for an intra workout. Right now, I'm not like I've got nothing in mind. I still have things in trailers and boxes in my house. That's sort of my main emphasis, and main thing is taking care of my pup. But so my intra workout has been changed. There are some things that can be gleaned from there. Right now, I've got a little creatine in there, and actually, in this case, because it's so hot, normally I wouldn't even worry about this. I'm using hydrolyzed whey and highly branched cyclic dextrin because I have some. It was back at home, and it's like it's out on the shelves now, so it's there. And that's because, as opposed to using, let's say, dextrose, which would tend to bloat people, and goes into the idea of osmolality and what's happening when you have number of particles per unit glucose. There's differences there with a highly branched cyclic dextrin, high molecular weight carbohydrate source, and a hydrolyzed whey. I'm trying to do everything I can to facilitate absorption, especially gastric emptying. And I'm using pre-digested protein because training in that heat, the sympathetic nervous system activation is just about as high as it could possibly get. So that means parasympathetic tone is minimal, and nothing wants to go to my GI. So I'm going to bloat and get full. And I'm also putting a lot of fluid in, so I'm trying to stay hydrated. So I'm doing everything I can, and I'm not using a lot. And I've actually got some essential amino acids in there, which I had a bag that was in the back of one of my closets, so I pulled that out. So I'm just using that now too. People ask me about EAAs, like, should I use, you know, EAAs? And that's a whole other story. But generally, if you're looking for essential amino acids, it's cheaper to buy whole protein sources relative to that, and then you get the whole protein, so you don't end up, you know, running in a situation, let's say, where you just took EAAs in a fasted state, and now the only non-essential amino acids you're going to get are going to be from body stores elsewhere. So I'm using I'm just throwing a scoop of that in there because it's there, and I'm using probably using about total of 40 grams of protein, roughly, some of it's EAAs, and then 60 grams of carbohydrate. And that's my intra workout with a little bit of creatine in there.
What about electrolytes? Do you add some extra sodium, magnesium, those kinds of things?
I haven't. I haven't need to, but I take a multi mineral in the morning too, when I get up. So I think I'm okay there, and no cramping problems. So, I mean, normally through food, I put a lot. I mean, I put salt on my food. I use. I live on this stuff. How much sodium's in here?
Sriracha.
Sriracha. I can't actually. What's it say there? It's only got 70 milligrams in a teaspoon, but I get plenty of sodium. Trust me. So yeah, I haven't. You know, your body will figure that out for the most part. So yeah. And again, I mean, if I were trying to optimize everything, that's something I may end up doing. Like literally, my workouts happen to some degree when my dog has gone to sleep. I know I can sneak out, you know, so it's kind of in that spot. But that's a really good point. If you're trying to do 2-hour high volume workouts in the heat like that, then electrolytes could be a problem. I've found when it comes to cramping, and this is like in a peak week or a pre-contest type of scenario when you're most likely to see those things, that using a multi-mineral It just kind of gives your body everything. As long as your sodium levels are adequate and your fluid is adequate, giving a multi-mineral is sort of the best way to let your body sort of figure out what it needs.
Yeah.
Kind of supplying everything. So is it magnesium or is it calcium or is it potassium or is it sodium? Like, which electrolyte is creating an issue, and it can be different things depending on the person and their diet.
I personally noticed that taking a good amount of taurine can really support the the hydration of the body, and you don't have any cramps. So that's also something to consider taking.
Taurine's phenomenal for
Yeah.
preventing cramping. That's like almost. I have most athletes when they dry out for shows take taurine prophylactically, sort of preemptively, and yeah, taurine's a lifesaver. Literally, for some people, it can be a lifesaver. So it has some ergogenic effects potentially too, and it's actually a component of this supplement in the study that you sent for me to.
Excellent segue. That's what I was gonna. We had the Jedi mind meld was in effect there on that. So we can get to the main feature, I guess, or main topic of our conversation today. I'll pull this up and then we can start delving into it. So some background for the listeners, although they pretty much know this already. C4 is one of the most popular pre-workouts, if not the most popular pre-workout on the planet. And there have been a ton of studies. There's probably 100 studies now, if not more, on the ergogenic effects of caffeine on exercise performance, whether it's anaerobic, aerobic, resistance training. You run the gamut. Caffeine is safe when used reasonably. It's effective. It's been vetted over and over and over again. There's a position stand from the International Society of Sports Nutrition on it. Anywhere between 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight is been shown to be effective. Doses higher than that may be effective. Doses lower than that can be effective, but that ultimately also factors into the individual. What we don't see a whole lot of are multi-ingredient pre-workout supplements, like the honkin' pre-workouts that everybody loves to test and scoop and do supplement reviews on the YouTube channels and whatnot. Very rarely, most of the time, these are compared, the multi-ingredient pre-workout supplement versus a placebo, so a non-caffeine placebo. But is it the caffeine that's doing the work? Is it the combination, the magical synergistic effects of all of these ingredients put together? Or is it placebo? What's going on with this? We finally have some studies comparing caffeine only versus a caffeine match full-blown pre-workout supplement. And they used C4 for this. So I can let you start taking things away from there, Dr. Scott.
Okay, so I was just leaving myself a note here. This was, I think this was a study is this out of Poland, actually?
It is. Yeah. I didn't realize that till this morning when I was going back and reworking through it, and I thought, that's fun. It's Poland.
I got to be careful. I don't want to insult anyone here. If you guys know the researchers, potentially. So
I don't know.
They didn't name it explicitly, but this does seem to match the ingredients of C4.
Yeah.
I started to look those up, and there's so many hits, and they just listed a proprietary blend containing all the ingredients in the list that you're about to pull up, I think.
Yeah, I think it said, I thought down here
it's in the table 3, I think.
Yeah. I thought they listed down here, it was C4 in there.
Oh, maybe. I just looked for Cellucor and C4, and cellular. I did that too. I didn't see it. I didn't literally read every word, but normally those sort of things should be listed in the methods section, actually.
Yeah.
So, and there's some kind of issues with the methods section, but people can go to, if you scroll to, I think it's table 3, a couple more pages down, you can show the viewers the ingredients.
There we go.
There you go. Table 1, sorry. So that's what the suggested dose is there. And what they did is they wanted to match at 6 milligrams per kilogram, a caffeine-only condition. So that ends up being about 500 milligrams of caffeine. So they did sort of an overdose of the C4. So let's just talk about the supplement for a little while here. So that's they sort of a subsection of the study was they wanted to. I don't know if they did this retroactively or if this was really an a priori hypothesis they were wanting to test. Kind of hard to tell, but they did an analysis later, and they, going on their results, you can save yourself a good bit of money if you just buy caffeine as opposed to using this as your source of caffeine, given that these results suggest that actually caffeine alone was better, marginally better than the entire supplement. One thing that they mention, and the verbiage is a bit odd. They mention this in the I think in the methods as well as in discussion, that there are certain that one of the issues with label claims not matching the actual content of the supplement. Mm-hmm. Are you? I thought you were going to scroll down to it. Yeah. Is that they are certain that that their supplement contain what it says it does on the label, yeah. But they don't present any results of that analysis. So that's one potential issue here, is that it could possibly be because it's pretty well known that if you tell someone to take one scoop, that the average person takes more than one, sometimes two. And I know, just having been behind the scenes a little bit in supplement manufacturing, that you have to consider that if you're going to give, list something, with 8 milligrams of euhimbine in it, or 200 milligrams of caffeine, that the average person is going to take 1.5 or maybe 2 times that. So you don't want to run into issues where you're giving people, sending people to the ER because they're getting overstimulated in some way, shape, or form. So they did not document that was indeed the case. Another thing that I'm just sort of throwing everything together with C4 is that C4, and you guys probably know this better than I do, but you just Google around, it's sort of renowned for causing gastric distress. You just type in C4 gastric upset, gastric distress, and you'll see thread after thread after thread of people having that happen. Yeah. So the idea here then was that they had single blinded this study, which typically would mean that the subjects were blinded as to whether they were getting the C4 or the caffeine only, and the researchers knew. They didn't address that specifically, just because single blinded could be the other way around, not typically, and they didn't say why they did that. Why not create a double blind scenario? Like, what's the issue there? Right. Part of it was, if you add up that mean dose there, you get something like 16 grams total in the C4 that they were given, and versus only 500 milligrams of caffeine. So they said, you can see it right there at the top of the screen, supplements were served in liquid form. Yeah. So what we don't know is how did they create this single blinded condition where the subjects didn't know or couldn't know or weren't able to ascertain, and did they even ask them if they're able to ascertain this? This can be an issue sometimes when you do placebo-controlled trials, that sometimes you don't ask, like with caffeine, and there's a review by Gurgic, Brad Schoenfeld's worked with him a good bit, and one of the issues they bring up is a lot of times they have placebo control, and not everyone can tell if they're on caffeine, but a lot of the studies they don't ask, did you know that you're on caffeine or not? So you've got a scenario here where one supplement is like 16 grams of stuff in fluid. Is it raspberry flavored? Like, how did this come across? Right. Or did they just throw, a half a gram of caffeine in water and then the flavored one? I doubt they did that, but those details are important, especially because, as you said, C4 is widely used. These are resistance trained individuals, and many of them, I would imagine, probably half of them have taken C4. They probably know what it tastes like. They know they know the consistency. They know potentially that it can cause gastric distress. And if you scroll down, we're just going to kind of wing this here as we go down through this. They made some psychometric measures. I'm just sort of, I think this is table 3, actually, the one I was, so scroll down a little bit. There you go. So that they made 3 psychometric measures before and then after their 5-set resistance training bout. So they determined a 1RM, and then they set them up at 75% of that 1 RM, and they did 2 bouts with the 2 different conditions. They didn't say how they randomized that, which you kind of presume they did. There was no order effect, so that's good. But it was single blind. So we've got Rosenthal effects. We've got all these experimenter effects where, like, okay, I know this is the C4. I'm giving you the C4.
Right.
Those can have an impact on what your expectations might be. There are subconscious influences that the experimenter can have on the subject that we lose out on because they only single blinded it. And now we've got a situation where you've got 16 grams of stuff in water versus a half a gram. And there were no order effects, but it's possible that they somehow figured this out. And if you look in that table 3, there are 3 psychometric measures. Were a feeling scale. It was like a 0 to 6, good, or like a -5 to +5, maybe. Good or bad. There was an arousal scale. So that's a FAS. And then there was basically an RPE scale. And actually, they felt less good at the beginning. There's an effect size of 0.31. It wasn't significant, but that's kind of a low moderate effect size. It makes me wonder if it would have been made sense giving us a C4. Like, just ask if the subjects knew what they got each time. Yeah. I did for my PhD dissertation. I did a creatine study. And it was double blinded, and we were training the subjects with electrostimulation, so their training efforts didn't matter. I was just ramping up the current and the forces they produced in the training under progressive overload fashion. And I tell you what, those guys would come in, and I had a couple subjects. They were always trying to, like, get me to let them, give them the hint as to whether they were on creatine or not. I'm like, I don't know. I'm blinded to this too. I can't tell you. And he's like, well, what about this? I'm like, I'm not going to try to. So it's very possible that they could have gotten this information because subjects they're curious about what they got. Yeah. So there's that. Another interesting thing when it comes to just these psychometric measures while I'm here is like the RPE has been validated. But what's important with psychometric measures is to have and this is true for all measurements really, is to have a stable, reliable measurement in your lab, so to demonstrate that you can, come back on under similar conditions or equivalent conditions on a daily basis and reliably measure this in individuals. Because some of these things are hard to explain to people. You have to have a standardized way of doing it. For instance, their RPE scale was a rating of perceived exertion, with 0 being nothing and 10 being maximal. And for some unknown reason to me, and I couldn't glean this from the methods, maybe you guys can, they had pre-exercise RPEs of about 2.5 to 3. So I don't know why their rating of perceived exertion would be 0 when they're at rest before they exercise, or would not be 0, or like why it would be 2. Yeah. So that suggests to me, like, just that without any explanation of that, and that somehow there's something going that I don't know how much faith I can put in their psychometric measures. Right. So related to that, I'm just kind of tearing away layer after layer after layer. We've got now psychometric measurements that are potentially subject to placebo effects and experimenter effects. And we've got a resistance exercise protocol where there was no familiarization. So they haven't come up with necessarily a stable measurement. Another example from my own experience, when I was from a master's degree, we wanted to have sort of a stable, measurable ergometric performance measure in firefighters. We did a combat challenge as a measure of performance, and we put them on a Concept 2 rower, which is a full body experience, just like these combat challenges. But rowing is something you can get better at over time. So we familiarized them to rowing with 6 weeks of, I think, 3 or 4 times a week rowing under one-on-one instruction with someone from the crew team at the University of Texas. So we had a stable measure. So when we did these performance measurements, we knew that they're not going to get better time after time. They saw no order effect here, so we don't know this, but we don't know how they randomize things. So they don't just have a stable measurement, but more important than that, I think at least, is that, and it's something you sort of pointed to, is they don't have a placebo group here.
Yeah.
We don't know in particular, now combining the ideas of these psychometric measures and the placebo effect with this particular exercise stress, we don't know in their hands, in their lab, the way they administer this 5-set exercise, resistance exercise, bench press test, whether they have a measurement that's sensitive to the ergogenic effects of caffeine at all. We don't know, like we don't have like a control condition, and then a placebo condition, and then a C4 condition, or multi-ingredient pre-workout supplement ingredient, MIPS. People will see MIPS is the acronym they use, and people are kind of following along. That's C4, or in the caffeine. So we don't know necessarily that caffeine had any ergogenic effect. And I see this often. If you sort of read through their discussion, they imply that, caffeine had an ergogenic effect and there was kind of a lesser ergogenic effect, or that ergogenic effect was blunted by taking in the multi-ingredient pre-workout.
Right.
We don't know what the caffeine dose was in that, because they didn't show the results of that analysis. And we don't know that there was an ergogenic effect at all. Subjects, I presume, were given informed consent where they were told that they're going to be given caffeine.
Correct. Yeah.
So they have an expectancy of some ergogenic effect. They might be expectant they're going to have caffeine both times. It could be, just because you don't know, because they didn't gather these data. But let's say that, 50% of these individuals have used C4 in the past, and a quarter of them have had gastric distress, and they had how much beta alanine was in there? Was it 5 grams?
On average, you're getting about 3,000 milligrams.
3 grams. So some people, yeah. Well, but that's in a suggested dose. It was 5.
Oh yeah, 5. Yeah, 5. Yeah. So you're gonna be tingling your face off if you're new to beta alanine.
Yeah. So some people like that. Some people don't. They didn't mention that at all. That's that could be this feeling thing. Like it's kind of like, it's like, so what's your sense of your core temperature right now? Well, the person's hair is on fire. It's like, my core temperature is okay, but my head's on fire. It's like, so how do you feel now? It's like, I feel okay, but I feel like my skin's going to burn off my body because of the tingling. So some people, if it's possible that there are individuals in this group that have taken beta alanine before. So now they're completely unblinded because they can tell beta alanine's in there. And that impacts what their expectations are, their expectancies. Maybe like, oh shit, my gut's going to not be happy in about a half an hour, because that's what has happened to them with C4 and or with beta alanine. I wouldn't think that necessarily with beta alanine, but so there's some missing. They're doing psychometric measures, but they're missing sort of the in the trenches. Like, okay, let's just gather the other basic stuff. Like, we're giving people C4 with beta alanine in it. How does it make them feel? What's going to give them the tingles?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't measure that at all. So that's kind of a start into the sort of the main thing. So the reliability of measurements, determining whether they've actually got a placebo effect there, not even necessarily knowing if they have a reliable measurement that is sensitive to the effect of caffeine is kind of a difficult thing. So there's some holes that I see here that would be that they've got a nice idea with the study, but those made it sort of difficult to see. The thing that they did find is that with the multiple ingredient pre-workout stimulus, that they saw a lesser total number of reps. They had some work measurements that they described in their methods, but they didn't report anywhere. So that repetition volume, I presume those are just reps. But they ended up with it was actually 1 rep more in the creatine condition versus the C4 condition. And the only significant set statistically was the third set, and that's like a matter of less than a half of a rep difference. Yeah. So there was just a little bit less on each of the sets, except the second set was exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
And there was
interesting
an effect size. Yeah. So So it was. I mean, there's a little bit of an impact on performance, and they note in the discussion, which is, I think an important point, is like, so would this tally up over time? How would this? That's the idea, is that the harder you can train, the better stimulus you'll create, and the more growth you'll create, or more muscle mass you would grow over time. So that's a long preamble.
No, that's great insight and background. I mean, that's some of the stuff that you don't typically hear mentioned when we're discussing these studies. Typically say, here's the study population, here's the treatments, either treatment or placebo, here's the results, and then we'll give some nuance on that. But what you were talking about as far as the Rosenthal effects, no inclusion of a placebo, some of the reliabilities of the psychometrics that they were measuring on there. All of those are very, very good points to keep when you start digging into, the research that I don't think the average individual really even considers or isn't even aware of to even give a thought to begin with.
Yeah. And the thing too, and I'm very glad that they put there were no order effects. So what that means for the listeners, or not sure what I'm talking about there, is that they didn't see any effect of the order in which the supplements were given. So it wasn't that they saw the second, if C4 was given the second time, that there was an effect that you didn't see the first time, or vice versa. There was nothing along those lines. So they didn't get better in the second bout versus the first bout, irregardless of what supplement they got.
Yeah.
But what would have been nice, which this is something that you can do with a familiarization protocol, is they made no mention, and this can be super important. They simply said to the subjects, as far as, in a generic way, just maintain your habitual routine in all ways, shapes, and form. But they didn't control for bench pressing or chest training in relation to when they had their performance bouts. So they had at least 72 hours. So in some cases, it might have been 72 hours, might have been 3 days. It might have been chest day, for some guys. They come in like Monday and they come in Thursday. And then someone might have said, well, I can't make it back in for 2 weeks. And you got a different scenario there. And they also didn't make any mention. This is really important in the caffeine studies, about habitual caffeine use. So, if you're habituated to caffeine, this is a general effect that you see. You don't see an effect from caffeine doses. If someone normally is, drinking a pot of coffee a day, you can give them 300 milligrams of caffeine, and it's a drop in the pot, so to speak. It doesn't have an ergogenic effect. Whereas
That's me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, but if someone is caffeine naive, and you give them 500 milligrams of caffeine, we've got an inverted U here with stimulus, or performance and arousal level. So you can end up being too aroused. And like I said, there's no order effect, but I mean, I can imagine like someone comes in and they don't have any caffeine. The first time they get the caffeine, let's say, and they're like way high, they're like, holy shit, they're buzzing, and it takes a few days for habituation to go away, but they may have been even some psychological adjustments, like, okay, I'm about to go through that again, which wasn't pleasant because it's highly overstimulated by all this caffeine. So just controlling for those things are important. It's really, you can't just, I mean, people try to do dietary recalls, which is better than nothing, but you can't just say, keep everything the same and not pay attention, because you've got advantage of having resistance trained individuals here who had some modicum of strength. They got their own program they're maintaining. They got their own caffeine intake that they may be maintaining, and you don't know what this is. So you've got these intervening factors that aren't controlled for, and it just reduces your power in your study, because these are other outside factors that create, quote unquote, you call it a source of measurement error, basically, because you can't quantify the impact of the caffeine in someone who has varying caffeine levels or caffeine intake. They wake up one day and they have a cup of coffee, and the next day they just don't, if they don't feel like they need it, or maybe they've got maybe some of these were students. I don't know, what was their average age?
It says male between 16 and 40 years old.
What was the show the average? Let me see here. I'll look for it. But some of them may have been students. I mean, maybe they got up they had 5.5 years of training experience, which is really high for these studies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't give an average, I don't say. See,
No,
so
I didn't see any.
that's important. But some of them may have, one day they came in and they woke up and, they didn't have time to have a coffee because they had to go to 8 o'clock class, or they woke up that day and they had coffee because they had to work and they came in the afternoon. The other day they slept in and they had no coffee because they woke up at 10, So you've got all sorts of intervening factors. It's just that this is why science is not easy, man. The quote unquote keyboard warriors who step back and I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to frame what we can take from this study.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned, Rob, was to try to, look at their explanation for why they found what they found. I think there are some things that are potentially explanatory that they didn't measure, like habitual caffeine intake, or do we have a reliable measure? All these sorts of things could, there's sort of weaknesses or limitations of the study that could point to why they may not have had may have picked up on an effect that was actually there. So
one thing I'm curious about, and this is kind of piggybacking off a discussion I had with another supplement brand owner, and for disclosure for the listeners listening to this, I have written articles on the potential interactions of caffeine and taurine in pre-workout supplements. I like taurine in my pre-workouts. I think it's a great ingredient, like we were talking about earlier. But as great as it is as an osmolyte, it also is a pretty potent antioxidant in the body, and it interacts with the GABA system in the brain. So the discussion I was having with this other brand owner, who is very much against the inclusion of taurine in pre-workouts for those two reasons, that it's a very potent antioxidant. So it could negate maybe some of the beneficial effects, the beneficial stresses imposed by resistance training or extreme exercise. And since it interacts with the GABA system, that could be adversely affecting some of like the neural drive or the cognitive function that's going on, and maybe impairing some of that neural drive that happens and its adverse implications with caffeine. But I'm not sure, like, if you have any thoughts on that whatsoever.
Are there other studies showing that taurine is ergolytic in any way? Or?
They mentioned something about taurine here, that most of those studies showing on caffeine and taurine, they usually an energy drink like a Red Bull or something like that along those lines, and they show reduced cognitive function. But it's reduced cognitive function, I think, after a cycling exercise or something. I would have to go. Let me see if I can pull up the paper real quick.
They spent about half of their discussion talking about the combination of caffeine and creatine as an example of two ergogenic aids that can be antagonistic to one another. And I was like, I thought that was nice for a couple sentences, but they went pretty deep into that, and there's no creatine in this. At least not in this version. I think there's creatine in some of the other C4 versions that are out now, like a creatine nitrate I found somewhere.
Correct. Yeah, there are some in there.
Yeah, but so what was your question? So the taurine may have been at work here, is what you're thinking is possible.
That's what the other brand owner and I were discussing. Just that maybe it's having some interactions, and it says this. I pulled up the article that I wrote a couple of years ago now. From the article, it says a host of human studies have noted that the combination of taurine and caffeine did not improve performance, energy, or attention. It did reduce feelings of vigor and the stimulating effects of caffeine. Also noted that the combination of caffeine and taurine actually increased feelings of fatigue. Again, this was in an energy drink scenario. These are the studies on that, 25, 26.
Yeah, okay. I wasn't aware of those. So, and they kind of missed that in their discussion here.
Yeah, and I just, I'm not sure exactly how believable that is, or to what extent it is. Is that just a bad designed exercise trial? And I would need to, cross compare it against those other studies. But it's taurine does affect the GABA system, but on the same time, you'll hear people rant and rave about how great the combination of caffeine and theanine is. And theanine's increasing GABA levels in the brain, so it kind of takes away some of the stimulatory effects of caffeine and kind of gives you that controlled focus where you're not super jittery or anxious. You know, you feel like the dog that sees the squirrel and chases it and goes one way or then the other or something like that.
Right.
Me, I don't like theanine in pre-workouts because I feel like it completely takes any edge off whatsoever. I like to feel that kick in the teeth kind of sensation from a pre-workout on certain days. I never get that sensation with taurine. And there are some other things about taurine saying it maybe could adversely impact cardiac function, but in the discussion here in the study, they mentioned that taurine actually has a protective effect on the heart muscle. So it's, you know, it feels like it's all over with. There's not a concrete answer on taurine.
That's the antioxidant effect.
With caffeine.
I think the antioxidant actions, because heart muscle is so aerobic, got so much, superoxide radical being produced there. I can see that. I mean, taurine has a protective effect when it comes to nandrolone's toxic effects on the gonads and the testes.
Interesting.
It's been demonstrated in rats. So it's got some got a plethora of really, really interesting effects. So, and the thing is, like, I mean, there's the caffeine placebo studies too, where you just tell people that they're getting graded dose. There's a cycling study that was really, they told the cyclists who know that caffeine is ergogenic that you're going to get graded doses of caffeine and we're going to do like a 1 hour time trial, I think it was. And they saw graded ergogenic effects of the expectancies that were produced by telling them they're getting higher levels of caffeine. So the more caffeine you told them they got, the better they performed. So the placebo effect, it can go, and if you other way around, you say like, you're going to get this supplement and this could possibly do this and watch out for this. So, if someone knows they're on the C4 and they're like, so what is this supplement? It's the C4. And so like, well, I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. So hey, I'm doing this cool study. What is it? C4? It's like, that shit just ruined my gut, man. That was awful. Like, you got all these potential expectancies that are coming about. And now they take what they obviously know is the C4 because they haven't covered up and hidden it in any way, shape. We don't know how they did that. And that's a big deal to do. Like, that's really tough to do, in these situations. You really can't hide that from people very, very well at all, unless they're completely naive to that particular supplement. Or they'd have to have done something like, create a like 15.5 gram bolus of something inert, not cellulose, not a fiber or something like that mimics how that C4 appears in water. Because I don't think I've ever had C4, to be honest. But I've had a lot of those ingredients and I had pre-workouts, and you can taste sometimes there's an acidic or a bitter taste, that you can't cover up, so it's, they know what's in there. They know what they've gotten. So whatever, preformed notions they have of what they're getting, that's going to impact their performance. And they actually saw that in their feeling scale, which they really didn't cover, and they didn't really discuss that in the. I thought that was pretty informative. That, and of course, that the RPE was, not 0 when they started.
Yeah, I'm trying to see. Did they mention anything else about the RPE in the discussion? I couldn't find anything.
No, they made a work measurement. They called it LU. Maybe that's a Polish word that abbreviation comes from. But that was but they never reported those values. And these are things sometimes, I mean, having written a few papers and then, way back when I, reviewed a good bit when I was still active in academia, you see all these things that come through. Yeah. I mean, that was they went in, they talked about, the reasons why, they talked about phosphocreatine basically being the predominant energy source, or being at its highest levels during those initial 2 sets, and you got more reps. But what they're not doing is tapping into what it is that connects phosphocreatine and the ergogenic effects of caffeine. Like why is caffeine? They're basically presuming has a psychological effect, so it affects motor drive and effort levels. And they didn't see any effort level differences. And so that phosphocreatine, that's a biochemical metabolic explanation for why there was higher performance at the beginning and none later on.
Right.
So maybe this may have been somewhat a language barrier type of thing. Maybe they're just saying that the phosphocreatine availability was so high that you couldn't really detect differences in fatigue that became apparent just in that one set, statistically speaking, at the end. But yeah, so there's a lot going on here, but it's kind of hard to know because we don't necessarily know we have an ergogenic effect from caffeine, and we don't know that we have a resistance exercise bout per se that would detect that ergogenic effect from caffeine. That's two ways of saying essentially the same thing.
Yeah. I also wonder, because so they took this, if they had taken maybe a better quality pre-workout supplement, one that's fully dosed, because you look here, they average it out. You're getting between 3.2 to 6.4 grams per day of beta-alanines, the clinical effective dosage. Citrulline malate, you got to be between 6 and 8 grams of citrulline malate. Though there's 2 studies that are sponsored by an amino acid house showing that a gram of each or a gram and a half of each citrulline and arginine help increase nitric oxide production and lower blood pressure. Taurine's anywhere between 1,000 and 6,000 milligrams per day. Tyrosine's usually 2,000 milligrams per day as a minimum. And caffeine can be anywhere from, 150 up to 600 milligrams based on your body weight. I wonder if they would have noticed a bigger difference if they had used a better quality pre-workout supplement.
Yeah, well, I mean, they went into addressing the beta-alanine. They talked about, like, this is something that needs to be taken long term. You're not going to get an acute performance effect here. So
right,
and that's nice marketing, and that's sort of supposed to be the convenience of this pre-workout, is that you're loading your beta-alanine while you're also getting the pre-workout effect.
Correct. Yeah.
In this particular case, you've got that intervening effect of potentially completely unblinding the subjects because they get the tingles when they take all that beta-alanine once at a time. So, yeah, it's interesting that I don't have any reason to doubt that you're right that this was C4, but I don't say that they say that explicitly. So
yeah, I'm gonna have to
maybe
look that
they
up and see if I can find it.
Maybe if you could, because I don't want to misspeak, but it's possible that the makers of C4 didn't want this literature to come out, because it doesn't really support the use of their supplement. Actually, the whole second section, they did kind of a market analysis, and they sort of looked at the extent to which people are paying for caffeine, which they're kind of presuming is the active ingredient based on the results of this study, in these multi-ingredient pre-workout supplements. And it's like you're throwing away your money, essentially, is what they're saying, when caffeine is what you're shooting for. So, but they don't note that specifically. So
I thought I remember that's what I had somebody forward me this study.
That's the proprietary. Those are the ingredients in one of the proprietary blends that's in C4.
Yeah.
I just had to look that up because I wanted to make sure we weren't misspeaking about the C4. So we could essentially, it's close to C4. So we maybe
I don't need to get
out every time I mention
a
those
nasty
letters.
Gram from Nutrabolt, although I'm pretty sure that
Yeah, you've gotten those before. Won't be the last time.
Yeah. Let's see if it's on here.
And this harkens back, like one of the very first articles I wrote, I think for Muscle Mag, like 15 years ago, maybe, was something like anatomy of a supplement. We may have talked about this when we had the first podcast way back when, but the thing that I have suggested for years and years is, figure out what ingredients you want to use. This is when it comes to a fat burner or a pre-workout or, whatever you're using supplement wise, and keep it as simple as possible. And that way you can save yourself money, because if you buy in bulk, and you don't mind, having a cupboard full of bags of stuff that can be a bit messy, you can use what works. And it may come every once in a while, you may find like, oh, this is exactly what I needed. All these ingredients are just the right proportion. but chances are that product is going to come and go.
Oh yeah.
So you lose the product and like, oh, now you're screwed, because you don't have those ingredients anymore. And when it comes to proprietary blends, there's kind of issues with those. You may find a product that you work. So let's say you start using, Fat Burner X for one of your shows, and you're like, I don't know what it is. It's in here. It's got these ingredients, and I've not used this one before, but this stuff works great. I noticed a substantial difference in how easy it was for me to lose fat. So I want to keep taking this stuff. Either you buy enough to last you for a decade, or you lose out potentially on the fact that this supplement might not be around 2 years later, and you don't know what's in it because it's a proprietary blend, so you don't know the ratios.
Agreed.
Per se. So that's, and relating this back to the science, that's the difficulty in studying this stuff, because they sort of address the idea of the different components potentially having, and this not being a well explored phenomenon. It's kind of interesting. Makes me wonder about the origins of the study, because they clearly state, and this is the case, I think, that these multi-ingredient supplements are understudied. And the issue is that we don't have enough studies that directly delineate whether, if you combine taurine, because of this GABA effect that you've mentioned, with caffeine, that you lose the psychological stimulatory effects of caffeine.
Yeah.
So let's document that. So like this study, for instance, using, a clinically effective, so to speak, dose of taurine with a clinically effective dose of caffeine, taurine mixes really well in water. You could hide that one really well. That's easy to make a placebo out of, or control out of. And let's take a look at that individually. And now we can document that, with clear, reliable measures and do a double-blind placebo. There's no reason why you should not do that.
Yep.
I mean, it's a pain in the butt. You have to have a third person mix up your ingredients, and label them, and usually have like a code. Different ways number of ways you can do it. But I always had like someone, who did all the work, who was not affiliated with the study in any direct way, shape, or form, and someone you knew and trusted, and they would mix them all up, and they were in charge of making sure they knew what each person got. And you only break that code after you've done all the stats and done everything. It's like, okay, we run all the stats. Now we need to know who got what, or what was what, so A and B, or whatever you called it for the stats.
Yeah.
So
one other thing that might be interesting is that they gave the supplements only 30 minutes prior to exercise, and most of the study, like the standalone studies on either citrulline or caffeine, they're dosing them out at least 60 minutes. So maybe there wasn't enough time to load the ingredients in the bloodstream, but it's not reaching peak values. It's entering the bloodstream at around the 30 to 45 minute mark, but you get the peak levels of them at the hour mark. But,
I think most people use pre-workout, so like 30 minutes before, so maybe that's why they did that, just
right.
Is a little more in the trenches. But you're right. Yeah, 60 minutes is, this is kind of the standard at 3 to 9 milligrams per kilogram, which is a huge range.
It is.
I would have, like, there's so many, cool things that could have been done here. They could have done a taurine only, a caffeine only, and a caffeine and taurine.
Yep.
Completely double blinded. Would have been interesting.
Yeah.
And then the flip of that, it would have been interesting to see if they had them do 5 familiarization bouts. What's your weekly? Because most people are almost everyone trains on a weekly schedule.
Correct.
So it's like, okay, let's get you on a weekly schedule for 2 or 3 weeks if that's okay with you, and then we're going to bring you in on your chest day, and do the bout. And we're going to do that bout, every week for 5 weeks. And we've determined we got a stable measurement. And then it's like, now we're going to start giving the drinks that you get.
Yeah.
And they're flavored the same. They look the same. They taste the same. No one can know. The subjects don't know. The researchers don't know. They've established, like, there's also just familiarity, just in a general way. Like, you come in, you've done your warm-ups, and then the first time you come in, you do the first test for the first time. They were I think they had people, they put a citation. They're doing their reps in a powerlifting style. I think does that mean they were pausing on the chest for each rep? I don't know.
Yeah, that's another good point too.
they sort of, they noted that, but that's a paused bench press is not how most people bench press. So there's some learning that happens there. So, but
Touch and go. Many people do that.
Yeah, right. And I mean, you can change the number of reps you get. If you go touch and go versus pause, you can go from 8 to 15 reps, just in the style of the pressing. So they didn't mention anything about tempo. So another thing that I brought up, there's no metronome involved here, which is a typical, way that this is done. At least for these types of things. So, you figure out, basic tempo that everyone can maintain. And once they lose tempo, that's when the set may end.
Right.
So.
And they also think that not many people train exactly the same. Times between sets and so on, resting between sets. It all makes a huge impact on the entire, results. So I also think that the overall outcome of this whole thing is just a bit skewed, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean that goes back to this notion of was this particular exercise stress sensitive to a creatine or caffeine ergogenic effect?
Right.
Exactly. I mean, there's no order effect, but I'm sure that just since it had to be a learning effect. We had a situation for my master's thesis where we had basically a partially double-blinded situation, and we had 3 different conditions. I won't go into all the details, but for one of those conditions, we were giving what we had was dichloroacetic acid, which impacts phosphate dehydrogenase activity and glucose disposal. So less lactates produced can have ergogenic effects. It's given as a emergency procedure for babies and infants that have lactic acidosis. So we were going to use that as an ergogenic aid, or test it as an ergogenic aid. But in order to do that, we had to get investigational new drug approval from the FDA. So I had to have a physician on site. So on that particular day, there was a doctor there, and we just sort of played it off as he just happened to stop by, and he was a friend of my professor, so they were both there and they met, and they just wanted to see how things were going, blah, blah, blah. But he was there because on that day everyone got DCA. We knew that, and I knew that. The other days I didn't know what was going on, but on that day that was what was happening. So it may have been I wonder, because they didn't mention this, maybe they didn't randomize their order. Maybe they gave everyone the same thing on one day, and that's why they said this was sort of single blinded, because they gave everyone, maybe they said, if we give them, and this would make sense, we give them the C4 with 16 grams of stuff in there in the water on the day one, and it's nice and sludgy and thick and nasty, and then we give them 500 milligrams of caffeine in 12 ounces of water. How much fluid they gave, we don't know. They're going to know something's different, So maybe, maybe we want to maybe they ordered that in some way just so people weren't aware of exactly what they're getting. But I'm just guessing because they didn't tell us. So
do we know if the researchers added something extra to the liquid that contains only caffeine? Because
no flavor. We don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, with the C4, you got all different kinds of super tasty flavorings, enhancers and so on. So that can also play a big role. And as you said, with the gut distress and so on, maybe some of the colorings or the additional sweeteners can impact hugely, the distress of the gut. People were complaining about that.
Or just expectancies about having gut issues. Maybe it's not going to happen, but they just know that okay, this is coming back. Okay. So yeah, there's room for improvement here. And this comes down to just kind of went through this as a co-author. I got to watch it more so, but Chris Barakat, if he happens to see this, he finally got a case study that we did. He was the subject on Peak Week. And he had to submit several times to different journals because it didn't fit the form of the journal or what the journal's mission was, et cetera. And one of the editorial processes was, pretty substantial. But after that, things got cleaned up. But the editorial process is really where these things should be caught with an article like this, a study like this. So, they should be these questions that, I've pulled. These are the things that I would note if I were an editor and say, this is a concern. It needs to at least be addressed. So we can say, like, how much can we make of this study? How much value does this have? And when you're not controlling for the placebo effect, you're not telling you what you tried to do to obscure and keep the subjects from knowing what was in there. You don't know about the reliability of your measurements. Like none of their measurements. We don't know if the measurement's sensitive to what you think you're trying to detect. It's kind of like we scanned the beach for metal and we didn't find anything. Like, well, does your metal detector pick up aluminum? It's like, does this resistance exercise pick up on this bout pick up on caffeine's ergogenic effects? So like, we don't even know if you've got a viable test probe, so to speak, to evaluate the effectiveness of either of these conditions. So we don't know if there's any ergogenic effect whatsoever. There may have just been there may have been an ergolytic effect from the C4 in this particular, which that feeling score, sort of suggested something was different. They picked up on something, there. It wasn't significant, but it was a substantial effect size. You can do an effect size analysis, and that would have been interesting for them to do that. But that jumped out at me. So anyway.
Well, I guess like at the end of the day, like across the 5 sets, there was only 1 rep difference overall, like on average. So I mean, some people may have had 5 reps more on the caffeine only, or 10 reps more, but it averaged out to 1. So it's funny that they say it's a significant, but I mean, statistically significant, yes. Real world significant, I wonder, is that really enough to say that caffeine only is far superior to a pre-workout supplement?
I mean, the practical significance, if that were to happen every time on a regular basis. So like, if you're someone like working along a program like dog crap training, for instance, which, probably heard me talk about, it comes up a lot on my podcast, or fortitude training too, where you're literally, you're trying to eke out like a rep or 2 each time. So you've got an exercise you're holding on to, and you go 3 or 4 or 5 times, and then you have 2 days where you don't get any improvement in reps with the same load, then you drop that. But if you get an extra rep, you're still making progress. Yeah. So, whether that would continue, ad infinitum, like, for the rest of your life, probably not. But that could mean that you go, let's say, 7 weeks instead of 4 weeks making progress. Yeah. And that's something which I think, could make a difference over time. There's, I always wonder too about these studies. This would have been nice because I just was talking to a phone consult client about this the other day. I talked about it so many times on all my podcasts, but set of studies where they looked at frequency of training. They used within subjects design. One leg was trained 5 times per week. The other one 2 or 3 times per week. First study showed no difference in it was 15 versus 6 or 9 weeks, 9 sets per week training in terms of muscle growth. But when they looked at the individuals, they saw some pretty interesting things. Some people grew really well. Some people didn't. Some people grew better from the higher volume, higher frequency conditions. Some people grew better from the lower volume, lower frequency. So there's variability. On average, there was no effect. Yeah. So there may have been, some people who, are like, maybe they've used C4 in the past. And they hadn't used it for 6 months or whatever their exclusion criteria was. And they take the C4 and they're like, man, this is the shit. All right, this is my bomb, right? I'm back in the saddle with my good old buddy C4. Here we go. Yeah, man. And they go to town and they get 4 more reps. And then there may have been some individuals, who there was an ergolytic effect. They're like, okay, C4, I'm going to have diarrhea later today. This is great. Like, why the hell am I doing this? I'm not getting paid enough for this study. Yeah. Let's get this over with. I don't feel so good when they ask the feeling score test. And so that shows, so that there may have been variable effects. So this guy got this idea of non-responders and responders to some degree in varying degrees too. So, some people, like, it sounds like, Robert, you like pre-workouts, like you like to, kick in the pants.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, yeah, on certain days, on a lower body leg day, no, like it's going to be a cup
Okay.
of coffee or something like that. I do not want like my heart rate jacked up. It gets high enough doing Bulgarians and lunges and all this other. I don't need a high stim. I don't want it like chest and back or like a pull workout or a push workout. Yeah, I can handle 300 or 400 milligrams in a pre-workout. Very rarely do I go above 350 though. Just I don't need that much or even want that much to go
Right.
above it. I can handle it, but I just typically don't.
Yeah. Thing I was thinking about is, I mean, some people really want that. Some people don't.
Yeah.
You know, so it depends on the person's experience with pre-workout. So we don't know what happened to the individual. So it's that would be I would love to. Back in the day, you know, like decades and decades ago, you saw in so many studies they would list the individuals. They just put the initials down. Sometimes, a lot of times, the initials would match the initials of the researchers too, because they were their own subjects for many things. But then you know, and that's what really matters for the reader, the person who's like, should I be taking a pre-workout or not? Like, there's obviously there's, I would imagine there's something to say for C4. Like someone who's like, okay, these guys we've just been rambling for like an hour and a half talking about this study, like that really didn't, like, so C4 doesn't work, or this multi-ingredient pre-workout supplement, whatever it was.
Yeah.
It may even have an ergolytic effect, but obviously it does something because it sells like crazy.
Oh yeah.
So it works for someone somehow.
Absolutely.
You know, and you know, maybe the marketing is so good and the various, you know, the constellation of psychological factors that make us think that more is better, you know, got everyone convinced that they need to buy these. It tastes better. It's easy. You know, it's like, it just can't be so simple that you just should take a couple caffeine pills and you get the same effect. But there's possibly something there, you know? And that's where looking at the individual data could show you that, there were some people that had an improvement in performance and some people didn't. So your mileage may vary, you know, on average. And like in these studies too, like the thing that is always important to frame that I don't think gets mentioned enough is that the purpose of a study like this is to define a population. And we know what the range was. We really don't know what that population was. Let me look again here. Yeah, they just said, I mean, these were highly trained
18 to 40-year-olds, 5.5 years on average of training.
Yeah. So their strength levels, they didn't list the 1RMs, did they?
No, but it said they had to be able to do 75% of body weight, I believe.
As a 1 rep max? I remember seeing that.
Yeah, but do they also train you on a regular basis, or are they like training?
Be able to complete 10 reps with at least 75% of body mass.
So that's a 165-pound person who can do 135, just using American pounds here for a set of 10. That doesn't scream highly trained person. And you're right, Lukasz. It's a good point. Like, you know, they've been training for that long, resistance training experience. I trained when I was in my teens, and now I'm 35. Like, I doubt that was the case.
How many times you're going to the gym and you hear, "Oh, when I was in your age, I was like benching this or that, or squatting this or that."
Yeah,
that's just like you know,
like you or what have you. Yeah, but
exactly.
It'd be nice to know, like, have some, because we want to figure out who does this information apply to. So we presume that the subjects are sampled from a population. So is that population's like gym rats who train 6 times a week, who can bench twice their body weight, or you know, like that minimum of 75% of your body weight for a set of 10 is, you know, most people can get to that. Most men can get body weight sets of 10. You know, after a year or two of training, or many can. I don't know the exact number, but that's something that the 75% is easily achievable and doesn't take 5 years to get there. So there's a relevance there. And then the things that you can take from these studies is that if we plucked an individual from that population, which hopefully is as clearly defined as possible, how likely are we going to be able to say, or with how much confidence can we say that there's going to be a better effect from C4 or caffeine on performance when they do this particular bout?
Mhm.
So is that so we don't know exactly who that population is. And this study seems to suggest that you actually might be have a little bit less of a, you might perform a little bit less. I want to say ergogenic effect because we don't know if there was one, but a little bit less if you take the multi-ingredient on average. But that doesn't tell us. You can look at the standard deviation values and get an idea of how much the performance varied. Let me see something here.
Yeah, it was pretty.
It's interesting. There was a pretty large on that first set. The standard deviation was standard deviation seemed like they're all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's So you can sometimes look at that pattern, just the variability, and just see that gives you the standard deviation gives you an idea of variability. So where are things most highly variable? And there's a lot of variability in that first set when they're taking the multi-ingredient. So how you start off, whether you're going to that gangbusters or not, is more variable. It seems like there's probably a statistical test to compare the standard deviations there in those cases, but standard deviation is, I would say, it's definitely higher. Whether statistically speaking, I don't even know what the test would be to compare those two standard deviations. Maybe an expert out there can chime in and help me with that. But that could be done, of course. Greg Nuckols is someone, for instance, who probably could do that off the top of his head right now.
The stat buffs out there. I'm not.
Yeah.
I know enough to get myself in trouble with stats. I don't enjoy them by any stretch of the imagination or do them.
But that's just sort of an interesting phenomenon. The numbers are pretty tight post caffeine. Plus or minus less than 1 rep, where it's plus or minus 1.5 reps. So not a huge thing, but so when going back to the main point here is like, we've got a population. If you're one of those people that they tested here, and this was their sample that's supposedly representative of that population, which we don't know, how well can we say that the supplement would or would not affect your performance? And since we don't really know the population per se, there may not be any real substantial, what's really termed external validity. Like, can we externalize the results of this study in large part to the average person who's taking C4? So is that person stronger or weaker? They're probably in that age range, but we don't know enough about those subjects to really say, like, does this really apply to the guy who know, like, for instance, you, Robert, like like what pre-workouts work best for which days for you. So you have experience with pre-workouts. You've been training. You train consistently. I imagine you're stronger than the average person in this study, although we don't know how strong they were.
Right.
Because we don't have that information. That would help so much.
Yeah.
That totally tells you about the relevance to the average person reading this, or to in the real world, in the trenches. So. So the study it gives you a generalizable findings, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what happens for the individual.
Correct.
And that's where it matters for the person is whether they're going to take the supplement or not.
Yeah.
So
it's like these studies they give you an interesting finding, but can you take it verbatim to apply to yourself? No, it's just something to consider, and then you adapt based on your personal experience and preferences and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
One last thought on that. It's just that those data are so often there. Like, and I say this too, like, it's the same universe where people go and train at 24-hour fitness, and they go in the lab and they do this stuff. The problem in the lab is that they did us very specific. We don't know how that bench press protocol was exactly administered,
right.
but they did have subjects who could have told you about the tingling that they got, or GI distress that they got, or whether they knew they were on the supplement. Like, you can have a come clean session, a debriefing session at the end of the study, and say, okay, is there anything you'd like to tell us about your experience, such as anything in the following areas? gastric distress, other areas that you perceive the supplements would have, been affecting your performance. Did you know that you were taking this supplement or that supplement afterwards? And you can have a third person gather those things so that the experimenters don't know who took what. They run their stats, so they're still blinded to things. And then afterwards, they're like, okay, we're in our experiment. We're not sure what's going on. It's like, okay, look at this. We had 5 subjects who had an ergolytic effect by 2 reps or more in their rep total. All 5 of those told us that they had gastric distress, previous encounters with C4, and they all knew they were taking C4.
Yeah.
I wonder, that's important to know. And that gives you a scientific foundation for a future research study to say, okay, now we got to make sure we cover this stuff up better so we don't know that they're taking a placebo. Or they're taking the real stuff, because the placebo effect is tremendous. Expectancies are tremendous, and that's what pre-workouts are really all about. It's like, now I'm turbocharged. I just took the stuff. I just Shazam just juiced me up with the lightning, or like I'm hulking out, or like whatever. Like you're becoming a superhero because now you're souped up on the stuff.
Yeah.
And if you think, oh shit, pardon the pun, like I'm taking something that's going to upset my belly, I'm not going to have a good performance here. Well, guess what? Self-fulfilling prophecy is very potentially an outcome there.
Very true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to keep picking your brain for another hour, Dr. Scott. The reason I dropped off screen about 10 minutes ago is my AC guy just called saying I'm going to be there 2 hours earlier than expected. He's going to be here in about 10 minutes, which we're good. We're having the hottest day on record here in Austin, and my AC started not working so well last Thursday. So I'm very glad that he's showing up today, but he's going to be here in about 10 minutes. Otherwise, I would love to keep picking your brain.
Clean out the drainage pipe. Vacuum out your drainage pipe, your water pipe.
That's it's not. I wonder if it's not charging, like the Freon's low in it too.
Oh, could be.
I think that might be an issue, because it'll hold it during the night. We put it down to 68. During the day, it's around like 74, 75, and it's not holding at that temperature during the day. It's creeping up to like 78 or so. And obviously, we're at 106 degrees here right now in Texas, but still,
I lived in Austin.
We got to do a follow up, and I will do my best to contact the researchers because they are based in Warsaw, so it's not a problem.
Joseph Studzinski University, was that it?
Yeah, I will do my best to send them an email and try to connect with them and ask them some questions, and maybe also provide them this podcast. So maybe they will, do something with it.
They're going to be angry. They're not going to like it very much. But
who cares?
Yeah. I mean, literally, it's just it's sort of the job. The purpose was to sort of take this apart, and I mean, I normally wouldn't take it upon myself like to just destroy this study, but it's the ideas and the notions about things that can muddy the waters when it comes to research findings. It's important. So I wanted the listeners to know about that. So
at the end of the day, at the end of the day, we want to get better, right? So
absolutely,
I think they will appreciate that.
Okay,
yeah, it's not done with any malicious intent or anything.
No.
Dr. Scott, is there anything you want to plug, or
I'm a
direct the
marketer.
listeners to do or anything?
Yeah. Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. That's my book. It's on Amazon. It's a brain dump. It's got all sorts of stuff in there. I find it helps a lot of people. I've gotten so much wonderful feedback of people who've just been able to take the bull by the horns by themselves and have tremendously profited, and that they've been able to diet down for shows or make gains, and they've done it all themselves. And I'm not making this an anti-coaching plug here, but just having had the experience of being able to have done it all by yourself, basically, with that book as your guide has been really, really rewarding for lots of people. So I'm happy to spread that word, because it makes the endeavor more valuable for people. So that's why I wrote it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. I will include notes to that, or links to that, in the show notes. There we go. My brain got crisscrossed for a second.
Too hot.
Yeah. Thank you again, Dr. Scott, for your time. Lukasz, thanks again for hopping on the podcast and getting this going, and making us all meet up. We appreciate it, man. And we'll catch you all next time on the Supplement Engineer Podcast.
Right on. Thank you.
Thank you.